Making friends as an adult working remotely is hard. Even with the rise of social and friendship apps, people still long for an IRL connection that's not so focused on URLs. Our guest today is looking to empower people to meet and connect in person.
You're listening to Found, TechCrunch's podcast that brings you the stories behind the startups. Today we're talking to Andy Dunn from Pi, an app that helps people host gatherings and make genuine friendships. I'm Becca, and here to talk about how people can meet their next bestie is my amazing co-host,
Dominic Midori Davis. And before we get into our conversation, we have our two truths and a lie. And at the end, we'll tell you which one of these statements isn't true. So listen carefully. Is a lie that Pi employs in-person creators to host events? That Pi matches people based on shared hobbies? Or that Andy's key to productivity includes locking his phone in jail?
Ooh, listeners, you'll have to keep listening to find out. But before we get to our conversation with Andy, a quick reminder to rate and review the show. You can do so wherever you are already listening to this episode, so it should be super easy on your end and super helpful on ours. And without further ado, here's our conversation with Andy. Hey, Andy, how's it going?
It's going great. How are you?
I am doing well. Thrilled to have you on the show. I saw some of your chat at Disrupt and was like in the green room trying to desperately get work done, and I couldn't because I kept just stopping and watching the conversation with you on stage.
Oh, wow. I am flattered.
Well, here we're talking about something a little bit different than what you talked about at Disrupt, although I'm sure we'll have a lot of overlap.
Sure.
But why don't you start by first telling us a little bit about Pi?
Yeah, so Pi, we're on a mission to defeat social isolation. According to the Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, we've lost 24 hours per month in in-person time together over the last 20 years. And 20 years ago, we were already in bad shape, right? That's the year that Robert Putnam wrote Bowling Alone about the degradation of the American social fabric, the way that cars and the suburbs changed out the town square for strip malls, the decline, for better or for worse, depending on how you see it, of religious institutions, unions, the PTA, upward mobility moving us away from our friends and family, industrialization moving us away from our friends and family. So we already weren't looking great. And then we've lost 20 more hours, of course, smartphones and social media changing the nature of attention. And as a result, we're way down on platonic friendship and feelings of belonging in our community, right? The Greeks had these wonderful ways of thinking about and talking about love, not just romantic love, but agape, the love of the tribe, philia, the love of our platonic friends, storge, the love of our families. And so at Pi, we're trying to bring some of that magic back, bring those platonic friendships back, get people out off their sofas, off of TikTok and Netflix, back into the real world, making friends and hanging out like we used to.
Maybe if you could talk a little bit about how it works, because I know one thing I think about is, of course, trying to get people to go out and do stuff. Of course, it's hard to find stuff to do, but it's also hard to just get people off the couch. Like sometimes it's like people get into scrolling on their phone and they never stop. Like, how do you guys work to kind of break those habits?
Yeah, so first we want to be there on your phone. We want to be in Instagram, in TikTok, and showing up where we know people are and presenting them with opportunities to go do things. And so the first step is we need to increase the liquidity of social opportunities for people who are at a life stage where they have more social capacity than they have social supply. So what do I mean by that? There are a few inflection points in life where we just have more time to be with others. Moving to a new place, friends getting into relationships, friends leaving town, friends having kids, new job, divorce, empty nest. These are all moments where we are desirous of having more. So we try to show up there. We're at Pi Social on Instagram and TikTok. And then what do? We present things that you might want to do, like Sunday Morning Club. So Sunday Morning Club was started by a guy here in Chicago. His name is Kyle. He was an alcoholic for a while. And then at the age of 28, decided he was tired of being hungover on Sundays. He decided every day he wanted to have a great Sunday. So he set up a club that meets on Oak Street Beach here in Chicago, beautiful beach. And there is beach volleyball. There are cold plunges. He brings out kiddie pools and fills them with water from Lake Michigan, which can be cold. There's yoga. There's healthy snacks. And the whole idea is like, let's have a good Sunday morning. And it started with about 10 people. He was hosting it on Pi. Then it went to 20, then 50, then 200. And now sometimes there's between 400 and 600 RSVPs to come out on a Sunday and like hang out and commune. Or a woman named Mary. Mary has got something called Show and Tell for Adults. It's just like what it sounds. You get up, you go to an open microphone, you bring an artifact from your life, from home, and you talk about it and what it means to you for 5 minutes, which jumpstarts some of the vulnerable disclosure that is one of the two key ingredients in platonic friendship formation. Platonic friendship formation, as we understand it, is got these two things. One, running into someone 5 to 7 times in a group setting, and then two, at some point, getting real with someone and mutual disclosure of something personal or vulnerable. So what we learned is that to enable people's social cup to overflow, to have a lot to do, to have 2 or 3 things a day that you could do, we need to stimulate a new gig economy. And so we call it IRL creators. These are the people who are enterprising, who bring others together. And we actually launched a fund called the Pi Creator Fund to stimulate and to fund them and to back them into creating these IRL communities. And so those are the first steps to getting people out and about. And then the next thing that we're working on is using artificial intelligence to take a lot of data and figure out who's going to click. And so right now we're backing another IRL creator named Sam, and he's doing something called Spark Connections. And Spark Connections is there's an intake quiz, and then Sam groups people using a simple model into groups of 6 for dinner parties. And now we're using new technologies to figure out who might click without needing a host, right? Because normally it takes a host to bring people together. And so our hope is that over time, Pi can be that host.
And I'm curious how you think about adoption. Thinking about apps trying to get people together, we had an app on the show earlier this year called The Nudge, which was meant to sort of like nudge people to get out and try to do stuff. They'd tell you what was up in your city. And I know like Meetup, and there's been other apps that have tried to help push people to get out of the house and build these kind of real life connections. How do you guys think about the competition in the space as well as the demand and the need for stuff like this, regardless if there's multiple companies building here?
I think there's a few inflection points that we've got here that make a new opportunity possible. So I spent, 3 hours with the previous CEO of Meetup like a month ago. Awesome guy. Meetup was founded, I think, in like 1998 or 2002.
Right.
And so one inflection point is there is a much deeper cultural understanding of our issues around social isolation, loneliness, and depression coming up with Gen Z than there was for previous generations, even millennials. There's more of a comfort with articulating the challenge, which is awesome. Like as we talk about, right? Like the first step into solving something is to admit it. So there's a cultural inflection point. The second is there's a different business model that we're pursuing. So the Meetup business model and the Eventbrite business model is you actually tax the hard side of the market. And so great book, Cold Start Problem by Andrew Chen, who's at Andreessen Horowitz, talks about the way to solve a cold start problem in building a social network or a marketplace. And you might think about Pi as a marketplace between IRL creators and what we call joiners, is to stimulate the hard side of the market, right? 3,000 Wikipedia writers are responsible for like a shocking amount of Wikipedia content.
Right.
I think the number one person on Wikipedia has written 1.4 million articles, which just mathematically doesn't even make sense to me. Like I have to run the numbers on that. It sounds like a lie. But this is the idea, is how do we stimulate that hard side of the market? And that's where, rather than asking those people who are doing the hard and the thankless work of bringing people together and saying, you pay us a premium subscription like Meetup Pro. No. We're going to pay you. You are the Uber driver in the analogy. The rider is the one, or the venue is the one that should be paying. We don't charge Airbnb superhosts because we want more superhosts and hosts. So that's the other change here, is it's a reversal of the way that the capital flows in the ecosystem that could stimulate a lot more gig economy jobs. And then thirdly is LLMs, large language models, which enable us to take all this data and figure out actually who's going to click with who. Because a lot of people think it's about the what. Like, okay, Becca, like you like Barcelona soccer and I do, or we both did fencing in college. Neither of those things I don't think are true. But whatever the common point of bonding is, and we think like, okay, people who can do that together will click and make friends. And it's not exactly true, right? You need to have those table stakes, but it's about who you click with for what historically are viewed as esoteric reasons, but it's not esoteric, right? Like, do you default to being candid when you first meet someone is a great ingredient in a potential friendship, right? Versus what I call a LORC, which is lack of reciprocal questions, which is someone who you meet and they don't ask you anything about yourself. Or if we grew up in the same place, that's an awesome shortcut, actually, it turns out, like common background in that regard. Music preferences doesn't matter. Whether you like cilantro or not doesn't matter. So we're figuring out what are the previously ineffable commonalities, not just in interest, but in personality and upbringing that lead to a higher probability of clicking with someone. And that's the other thing I heard from David at Meetup is the thing that Meetup members are most willing to pay for right now are being directed to meetups where there is a high probability of social connection. And then, by the way, ritual. So we're focused not on one-off meetups, but on a ritual of seeing someone again and again, because it's too much pressure to try to make friends the first time.
Right.
We're not all so socially adept that we're going to like just figure out how to click with people. We got to run into someone again and again, right? And then you only realize that it's a friendship in retrospect, right? Have you ever had that person that's like, can we be friends? And you're like, oh God, no. What you want is someone who you click with and you start spending time with, and then only later are you like, oh, Becca and I are friends, right? And that's the kind of organic and natural behavior that we're trying to productize.
I also was curious, like, how do you think about building this product in like a city? Because of course you mentioned like the Good Sunday morning ritual that guy has created. There's a lot of people in Chicago who could come to something like that, whereas you get more remote places where people are just inherently more isolated, maybe would need this more than someone based in a city, but that's harder to grow in that kind of environment. Like, how do you think about balancing the different needs in these different types of markets and just how the demographics are just going to be so different?
Totally. Well, it's interesting. When we started the company, I was living in New York City and it was prior to the pandemic. This is not an overnight success. We've been iterating and working on this problem now. I think we're into our 4th year. I think I bought pumpkinpie.com, which was the original name, literally on Thanksgiving Day in 2019, 5 years ago, was when this idea kind of, the germ of it began. And we found New York was super difficult. There are so many great consumer internet founders tinkering and experimenting with ideas around this problem and adjacent to it. And we just couldn't get attention. And then life has these nice serendipities, which is I ended up moving back home to Chicago. And I started to experience in a more acute way this problem. I had one platonic friend here, my friend Jim from college. He was going to be like my go-to for hanging out when I wasn't spending time with my family, because I've got a very rich family tapestry here. My parents are down the street. My sister and brother-in-law and niece are down the street. They live in the same building. My wife's cool. We have an awesome son who we really like. And I thought, okay, I've got all this love. Life is going to be great. And then Jim left town. And I just felt lonely. One day I woke up and I was like, I don't have any friends. Nor did I have the sense of tribal belonging that I historically got from in-person work, right? So my last company, Bonobos, it was so special. The culture was really magical. And every day I look forward to being amongst those people. You know, being a founder and CEO is sort of like being the mayor of a small town. I don't know. I have some embarrassing shit to say here, embarrassing stuff to say here. Like, I like feeling important. I like being the leader of the tribe when I get in there. I like spending time with people, getting to know people, leading people, making friends at work. And in the Zoom era, that was just missing.
Right.
And I think we told ourselves societally, like, okay, this is fine. We'll have less commute times. We'll have flexible schedules. And I do think for certain people at certain seasons of their life, it is great remote work or hybrid work. Personally, not for me. And I started to also think about all the people coming up in their 20s who weren't getting the benefit of in-person mentorship and social collision, serendipity, feedback, socializing that was so critical in the development of my career. So I started to feel like, you know what? We shouldn't optimize all of professional society around what's best for middle-aged working parents. Because by the way, those middle-aged working parents have tons of opportunities in the rest of the economy. And so we started running at Pi in Chicago. We built a team here. We quickly became one of the most desirous places to work because there's not that much action in Chicago in the consumer internet. We've never had a $10 billion public company in Chicago built in consumer software. We've never had a LinkedIn or a Snapchat, let alone a Match Group or a Duolingo. So we built a really attractive place to work. We built a great culture. We've got 12 people down the hall who really love being together every day. We're 5 days a week in person. We actually pretend the pandemic never happened. And we selected and recruited people who have that. And then we focused our energy on growing the creator community here and the joiner community here. And there was a much deeper hunger for it than I had experienced in New York. And I think with tech founders, we tend to think, let's start in New York. Let's start in San Francisco. Those are idiosyncratic cities, right? And now we're moving into some of these markets, but we're excited to do what we call eating the country from the inside out. Going from Chicago to Nashville to St. Louis to Minneapolis to Austin to Kansas City, going after these neglected markets. And then to your point, going to the suburbs.
Right.
So we see one of our most acute need points are young people in the suburbs are bored out of their gourds. They're living with their freaking parents. This is not a rich social life. And so even more so than rural areas, where oddly enough, like there's pretty good social fabric in some cases in rural areas because you like know people. I don't want to speak for it authoritatively, but we feel like these, I struggle to call them like second tier cities. I refuse to say that exactly, even though I just took a class at Second City. But these, let's call it Midwestern cities and their suburbs, we think are really rich germination ground for pie to take off. And candidly, like not that many startups or venture capitalists backing startups are paying attention to it. It's flyover country, right?
For sure.
And that kind of goes into my question, which was that this is a very different company than Bonobos, which is in apparel. And so I wanted to ask you about kind of the differences in building an apparel and consumer and some of the experiences you've had.
Oh my God, I love it. Let's start with the commonalities. The commonalities are we're trying to create a consumer movement over a change in the zeitgeist. And so Bonobos 2007 was basically how do we get straight guys to care about how their butts look in pants? This was a very big deal. This was a very big cultural change. I don't know if you remember how your dad dresses or dressed. You know, my dad, it was like pleated khaki shorts that could have been in a parallel universe, a kite, you know, white socks hiked up to the top of his calves with purple stripes, maybe sandals on. It wasn't a great look. And the idea of investing $100 in a pair of pants would have been antithetical to my dad's worldview, right?
Right.
It was $29 pair of Levi's jeans, $19 Dockers. And so we had to update the way that men thought about fit. And then we had a massive business model innovation, which is that we were among the first, or maybe the first, dare I say it, digital brand in the United States. Before all these great brands came up, Away and Warby Parker and Glossier and Harry's, there was Bonobos. And we had this vision, we can build the brand on the internet purely. Now, it turned out that was a lie because it's not a particularly good business model to do just that. We had to open 60 stores and do a wholesale partnership with Nordstrom and actually respect the way as well that brands had historically been built. But there was also a business model innovation. And so if you go back to our conversation about pie, we have the same two founding elements. We need to build a consumer movement based on a change in the zeitgeist, which is treating platonic friendship like a problem that can be solved via an app the same way that some people have had success with Hinge and Tinder and Bumble, you know, and turned online dating into a thing that can work, can also not work. And then secondly, a total change in the business model based on a technology inflection point, which is now we can monetize the easier side of the market through subscription rather than taxing the hard side of the market. And the inflection point in artificial intelligence, which I think is akin to the way that social media changed brand building, right? Like when we started Bonobos, Instagram didn't exist. When we started Pi, there was no such thing as a broadly available LLM like ChatGPT. So those are the commonalities. But Dom, your question is awesome because there are some things that are very different. And the three things that are different about consumer software compared to selling pants is there's no stores, there's no leases, there's no inventory, and there's no operations, right? So like Bonobos at a, let's call it a $100 million business had 500 employees between our stores and our corporate team. Pi might have 50 at that time. And it's a software company, right? So there's so much leverage in the size of the impact that you can have relative to the number of people that you build and the team that you build, right? Like Instagram was what, 12 or 13 people when it was acquired for $1 billion plus by Facebook. YouTube was 55 people when it was acquired by $1.6 billion for Google. So it's so much fun to not have those logistical and supply chain and inventory and human capital intensive challenges. The flip side of that is it's like trying to bottle lightning. Like, how are you going to build a global consumer app? The number of people that try to do that relative to the number that succeed, I think dwarfs what happens in the world of e-commerce branding. So we have our work cut out for us.
More from this conversation right after a quick break.
I know some people who are going to listen to this are going to be familiar with your journey at Bonobos and sort of this mental health journey you've been through as well. And knowing that, of course, Pi is in the same realm of the mental health space, of course, the social isolation problem and things that you mentioned at the top of the call. Coming from Bonobos and sort of the experience you had there, did you ever think of doing something else in the mental health space when you were thinking of launching another company? Or was it more like you came up with the idea for Pi and were like, this is a great idea I want to pursue? Or I'm just curious because it's definitely tied to some of the experiences that you did have building Bonobos and with your mental health journey, but it is a little bit different.
Yeah, it's different. The issue that I've dealt with mental health wise is bipolar type 1. And the reckoning for me with that came 9 out of 10 years into building Bonobos before we exited it. And the way that I got through that was just like a series of very fortunate events. My family stuck with me. My now wife stuck with me. I ended up figuring out medication that works, which is a total miracle, but took 6 months to get to the right pharmacological equation, tinkering in the medicine cabinet, all these different meds, and kind of got to a place of stability, found a great doctor. And I realized that for that issue, a lot of what you need is out there. Like, I think the biggest opportunities are in access to care and cost of care. And when I looked around at that time, a lot of people had already started those companies.
Yeah.
If you step back and look at it, I don't want to say the problem is solved, but there's a lot happening in the world of mental health tech. And, digital mental health stuff, the customer acquisition cost equation is extremely difficult. So to make this work is going to require governmental change, payers to change, corporations to change how they think about mental health. Are we going to actually invest in a mental health insurance product? None of that really spoke to me as something that I would be any good at. Like, I think that you need to actually know healthcare to do that stuff. You have to care about those idiosyncrasies of like, how do you do it? And I don't know, I love consumer joy. Like, I love selling pants. So the idea of building an app with gamification that was fun, like helping people meet people, that struck me as a problem that we can't solve pharmacologically.
Yeah.
If you need more friendship in your life, you can't go into a therapist and solve that. I mean, it might help to figure out why, but that problem just appealed to me more. And then I started to experience the problem authentically, and I didn't have a solution for it. Like, I have bipolar, and what do? I take medication and I see my doctor and I get good sleep. But when I didn't have good friends in Chicago, I didn't know where to go. And so I found Pi to be an opportunity that spoke more to me in terms of an unsolved problem compared to a problem where the solution was out there, but it was about access and decreasing costs of care, which I didn't feel like I authentically had any business trying to solve.
Yeah, that's such an interesting way.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. Because I know from chatting with healthcare investors over the last couple of years too, watching sort of the influx of people come into both the mental health space, but also just healthcare in general, building companies. VCs who have been in the space a long time have always been like, you kind of need expertise here. Like, this is not an area you can kind of just jump in. And of course, lived experience gives you a level of expertise, but yeah, like you're saying, makes total sense. Having lived experience with condition does not necessarily mean you have the background to lobby for new drug pricing and stuff like that. Like, those are just not the same at the end of the day.
100%. I think it's a key point of failure for entrepreneurs to experience a problem and conceive of the solution is different than having the unfair advantages to execute against it. Like, you need unfair advantages. And, maybe it was misguided, but I felt like building consumer movements, digital business model innovation, and candidly now, like the ability to build a world-class team that cares about in-person and to be building it in a market where people aren't paying attention, those to me felt like unfair advantages in building Pi that I wouldn't even know where to begin on building a mental health product that requires like knowledge of the payer ecosystem, let alone like relationships like that. I hope someone is figuring that out. I know a lot of people are working on it.
Definitely. And I know this touches on sort of what you talked about at our recent Disrupt conference. And I know you write a column about something similar with Fortune magazine, but thinking about approaching building this business differently for yourself personally and avoiding that founder burnout and avoiding some of those issues that came up the first time around that you want to avoid and everyone should try to avoid when they're building a company. How do you think about your headspace building Pi versus Bonobos? And of course, some of them are solved. Like you mentioned, you got a diagnosis, you're on medication, working with the therapist, but how do you avoid some of those common mental health pitfalls that come for any founder?
Yeah, it's a few very specific tactics that I could share to make this tangible. One is I have a lockbox for my phone. So I bought a jail for my phone, and every night between 8:30 and 9:30, I change my phone into red light mode you can go into the accessibility settings and turn on color filters so that I I kill the blue light and then I put it in this like jail and then lock it so that I don't stay wired late. Because otherwise, my tendency is like, I just love my phone so much. Like, it's part of what I'm building Pi for as well, is like, I'm so addicted. It's a joke. Like, I
Right.
walk around my house just looking at it sometimes for hours. It's my best friend. It's totally dystopian. So that establishing a boundary with this digital leash is important nightly. And then I lock it for 24 hours from Friday at sundown to Saturday at sundown. So I take one day to just like fully unplug. That's been big. And then what that allows for, the second thing that is totally different than building bonobos, is I sleep 8 hours a night religiously. It used to be that in my mind, I glamorized low sleep as a founder. And now I think about it really differently, which is, you know what, like 16 hours is a lot of time, which is 24 minus 8, to get a lot done in life, right? To get a
Right.
lot done in your personal life and your professional life. The marginal value of the incremental 2 hours of work that you could do to decrease your sleep to 6 is actually a net reduction in total work productivity, because the quality, everyone knows this, your brain works better on 8 hours. And that enables me to have more energy to work out, which is very trite, but I've like really tried hard to change my energy to get up in the morning and work out 3 days a week. And that's been like life changing. And then, I don't want to sound like a square here, but I gave up drugs and alcohol. Like, I just don't mess with it. I'm done. I don't drink at all. And that's nice.
I'm sure, yeah.
Like I consumed a lot. Like, I went to a doctor and he told me my biological age was 51 and I'm 45. And I'm like, I got to fix this. And I said to him, why? And he was like, dude, you just told me you spent 20 years drinking every night and sleeping 5 hours.
Right.
Like, that diminishes the quality of your chromosomes. I was like, well, how does that work? That doesn't sound good. So it's these lifestyle changes. And then, yeah, it's important. Like, I do therapy twice a week. Like, it's good to get feelings out of your body. I try to be honest with my wife about how I'm feeling and try to support her and derive meaning from that relationship. And parenting has helped me. It creates something that every day to me, I'm like, okay, I may not spend enough time parenting, but I at least know that this matters more. And so for all these reasons, I feel more capable of building something great than during Bonobos, when I was in that kind of like glamorous phase that actually was often a disaster, because I was dealing with, unmedicated and untreated bipolar, which is its own, asset and massive liability to company building.
Definitely.
Yeah, it seems like the conversation around, especially like mental health and founder burnout, has increased, at least since the pandemic. How have you seen the overall conversation around this evolve in the past, I don't know, 2007? Oh my gosh, is that like, I can't do math off the top of my head, but you know what I'm saying, since 2007 when you first became a founder?
I mean, look, I think it still requires 50 to 60 hours a week of output. I don't know any founders working 40 hours who are building something transformative. But I don't think it requires 80. Like, I'm just not convinced it requires 80. Like, for me, it's math. Like, how many hours are you working? Of course, you're thinking about it when you're not working. So, whatever, work-life balance. I mean, it's a total mind virus building a startup. Like, it's just going to invade your brain. And if it works, it's going to invade your brain for like the next 15 years. Because that's what no one tells you about startups, is if they work, you work on them for a long time. Like, look at the founders who have built big things. They're still working on them sometimes, 20 years post. The only way it ends after 5 years is if it didn't work, right? So you got to accept you are inviting a all-consuming dream and pain cave into your life, right? Because when it's going poorly, it's just even more. So, okay, table stakes, accept that you're allowing this mind virus in, you're welcoming it, and then accept that you're not working 40 hours a week with like a very rich personal life. You are squeezing your personal life in. You have to distort your energy to have healthy relationships on all other fronts. It's going to be hard. And for me, part of what helps with that, which is going to sound totally weird, is my wife's an entrepreneur. So we don't have marital conflict about relative energy spent working because we both do it. That helps. It also means we struggle on other fronts to like do life and parent and all that. And back to the beginning of our conversation, that's also why I moved close to my nuclear family. And I think this is one of the greatest life hacks of the 21st century is if you are a college educated information worker with geographic flexibility, go live near your freaking parents because they love you. They're going to drive you nuts. But the quality of life that we get being near our next of kin is really big. Like Saturday at 3 p.m., we dropped off our son with my mom and dad, and we were like, deuces, we'll see you tomorrow in 24 hours. And that's just like a big deal because Manuela and I got to go have dinner. And I don't want to sound obnoxious, but we actually got facials and a massage.
Amazing.
And like we got to reboot. Not possible if we didn't live near my parents and sister. And our son had more fun than when he was with us. Like he doesn't cry. He's like, see you, mom and dad. So I think it's important to think about the overall architecture of your life when making the decision to start something and make sure that you are in a season of your life and that you have a bunch of things figured out to make it possible. That you have like at least a bare minimum infrastructure. How am I going to pay rent, right? How am I going to sleep at night? Am I going to be neglecting others? And those conditions are not always conducive. And that's okay. If you want to start a company and these conditions aren't conducive, fine. But just be aware that, you're walking into it. Like you're going for it.
Yeah, no, you brought up an interesting thing because I feel like online I always see Europeans and Americans fighting because people in Europe are like, well, we all live with our families until we get married. And then people in America are like, well, we move out at 18 and then we just like move on with our lives. And there's always this discussion on like which side is better. It seems like in a weird way, young people, Gen Zers, we're kind of in this weird social spot where I don't know if it's like America for us right now is designed to be kind of socially isolated. Like you're saying, with cars, there's a lack of community infrastructure in a lot of places. We do move out young. We're kind of alone. Some people don't go back near their nuclear families. This is quite a broad question, but how do you see this playing out for young people in the upcoming years, especially if there aren't a lot of remedies to address this?
Complex. The grass can be greener on the other side. It can also feel greener on one's own side. And I think if people are advocating for their own side being better, that's a healthy thing because that means that they're happy with the way that they're living. The contrast I can give you that I experienced most directly is my wife's Brazilian. And over the course of the past several years, we have gone back to Brazil for a couple months. Not possible anymore with our current entrepreneurial setups, but we go to Rio de Janeiro, which is where she was born, and no one leaves Rio. First of all, it's God's cathedral. It's the most, Cidade de Deus. It's the city of God. It's so beautiful. And there's a lot of good quality of life stuff. Like you can be late for an hour to dinner. That's like carioca time. You don't work that hard. You're at the beach like both nights. Also, I don't know. I had like a chain ripped off my neck and everyone was like, oh yeah, don't wear a chain. So there's even more income inequality there because there isn't the kind of GDP growth or GDP per capita that we experience in the US because there's a lot of inequality here. But in aggregate, the standard of living in the United States is high. Just empirically, it's high. And yet you point out that, for Gen Z, it's not working for a lot of people, right? Like what's the elephant in the room? The presidential election that just happened, more white male Gen Zers voted for Trump than for Kamala Harris. Gen Z. A decreasing percentage of women in Gen Z voted for Harris compared to Biden, comparing the elections. So something's broken. And what I noticed with my Gen Z team members, which is about half the team of 12, is it's not about profit and money in the same way. It's about meaning. But that doesn't mean people, and I hate to generalize, but I'll have to do it, right? That doesn't mean that people aren't ready to work for that meaning. You know what I mean? Like I had the conversation with everyone I've hired. Like, look, this is a lot of work. This is a 50-hour job. It's not 40. And if you are not in a place in your life where you want that, please don't come. And you know what? Like everyone I had that conversation with is here and they are jamming and they are engaged. And I'll tell you something, their friends are envious. Their friends are like, how do I get a job at Pi? Because they're coming alive every day with what they do. And hopefully they enjoy like disproportionate rewards. Not just monetarily, but in terms of learning and development. And I think all humans want that. So it's a nuanced question. And I think it's important to honor that different kinds of people can and want to make different choices on this, both individually and societally. And I feel like my job is to offer a choice that is declining right now. which is a chance to just totally jam for the benefit of learning and ascending in terms of who you are professionally. That's kind of what I feel like my role is, and doing it in a city where there's very little of that in terms of the startup ecosystem here. That said, like I just told my wife, I mean, you can't say I'm wearing a Brazilian zip here. Like I'm ready to go retire in Rio as soon as that's merited.
And unfortunately, we're like running up against time. So I wanted to ask one last question, thinking about where you guys have gotten so far with Pi. I know, like you mentioned, you were not an overnight success. You guys got started pre-COVID. Where you guys have gotten to at this point. What's next? How do you think about the future? What are you excited about? What's down the pipe?
Well, we have work to do. I'm happy with where we are, but of course, really focus on where we need to go. So let's talk about the three big things that we haven't done that we need to do. The first thing we need to do is we need to build magic into the product. Right now, it's a utilitarian product. It has stimulated this IRL creator side of the house to generate great plans. That's cool. There are a lot of people going out to Pi plans with high frequency. We call them triple joiners. And our triple joiners have 95% retention at 100 days. And for those people, we have calculated we are adding more than the 24 hours per month back into their lives. So we're on mission with a small kernel growing cohort in Chicago, a bit in Nashville, coming to the Bay Area. So that's good. But we don't yet offer the dream, which is that we can use LLMs to put groups together without requiring an IRL creator. So like, if you want to play tennis this weekend, Pi puts together the foursome. If you're looking to go out for dinner on Thursday night, Pi puts together the group. If you're into, I'll just say Weezer, because for some reason, half of the people on my team love Weezer and one has a Weezer tattoo. They're in town. You don't know who to go with. We put together that group. That's the magic factor that we need to put together. And we're like on it right now. Like the team's working on this right now so we can deploy it. And we have some no code testing live. Particularly this thing called Spark Connections. We just had 12 groups of 6 having dinner last week. They all met up afterwards. Super cool. So that's number one. Number two, we need to grow from called 30,000 monthly active users to 1 million in the next 13 months. That's extremely difficult to do. So we got to build magic. We got to get to 500,000 monthly actives or 1 million monthly actives. And then the third thing we need to do, as you might imagine, is monetize. What's the monetization plan here? You can't just like raise venture capital and pay creators in perpetuity. And so that's where we've got 2 experiments running. One is on the venue side and the other one is on the joiner side, like a freemium offering on the joiner side, the side of the market that I think should be paying for it. Some small percentage, right? Like if you look at Spotify or if you look at Duolingo or you look at chess.com, these are 5 to 10% paying members. And so hopefully, we chat in 12, 13 months and we've achieved those 3 goals of, I call it triple M, million monthly actives, some magic in the product, and monetization, experimentation starting to bear fruit.
Well, perfect. Well, we do unfortunately have to wrap, but thank you so much, Andy, for coming on the show. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you, Becca. Thanks, Dom.
And that was our conversation with Andy Dunn. What was the lie?
The lie was that Pi matches people based on shared hobbies.
Sounds like they're trying to figure that out, though. That may be like coming down the pipeline, that they want to connect people by shared hobbies.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense as the next evolution of this. I mean, because that's kind of how people meet anyway from shared hobbies. Like everyone's joining a run club. Everyone's doing paddleball, picket ball, one of the balls. Everybody's doing that now. So that's kind of how people meet anyway.
Yeah. It would make sense for the app to connect people by shared hobbies, but in theory, that kind of an avenue would be the easiest for these people to sort of find other people in general. It's kind of like what we were talking about with him a little bit about this app being used in the city versus app being used in the suburbs, where you could argue you might feel more isolated. There might be less opportunities in the suburbs, but it's like, it's going to be harder to connect people there, where it's easier to connect people in the city because there's just more things going on, more things people to host, more things to do. But then they may not need it as much. I don't know. I see why people would use this, but I'm struggling to picture the target market.
Yeah, because I'm back in my little suburban town right now. And I don't know how younger people meet. I assume it's everything's based on like the schools you go to. I mean, that's how it was when I was growing up. You just meet people at like the movie theater or like you communicate online. And then the older people in the town, it's still very much like everyone goes to church or they see each other at the grocery store, like these community events all the time. I guess I'm the person in the middle because it's weird. So, I mean, I am trying to also figure out like how this app is used, but I guess that could just be from a lack of, I mean, now I live in New York City and I just join clubs all the time and that's how I meet people. So I guess I'm not at this point in my life where I hate to say like I don't get it yet, but like I'm also trying to figure out like, oh yeah, how does this work?
No, because I definitely agree. We probably have like the most skewed perception of it just being based in New York. Like I know the amount of things you can do here to meet other people based on like what you're into and stuff is just like it's almost probably like too vast.
It's like too much.
Like I went to like a female journalists in their 20s meetup a couple of years ago, and I remember that someone there was talking about how she recently came across that like her neighborhood had like a ferret owner club and like they all met up in the park with their ferrets once a week. And like we just live in an area where like any niche thing you want, you can find your community for it relatively easily. So I feel like I wish we could get like an outside perspective. Like I should have asked like my sister about this or something. And like her college friends are close, but like she lives in a house in a suburban town. Like they're not like going out to bars all the time where you would like meet people and there aren't as many opportunities. So like I'm curious what her take would be on this because maybe that would be like something that she would be looking for because it's just such a different dynamic.
That ferret thing. Are there too many ways to relate to people being in a ferret club? Yeah, I know. I also want to stay in a big city or at least move around my friends and family. So yeah, we should have polled people about this. There's definitely so many apps like this trying to connect people. And I love how people need an app to remind them to go outside and touch grass. Mm-hmm. I don't know what that means about us as a society, that we can't just do it. But there's definitely a market and a need for it since there are so many apps trying to connect people and get people to even host events and do things that are not so focused on the digital sphere.
And I know, like, even if we don't personally see the need for it, and there are other competitors in this kind of an area, anything that's going to get someone who otherwise would have chosen to just, like, spend an entire weekend at home isolated to go out and do something, like, that's just, like, a net positive, literally, no matter what. Like, there's so much research on that, of course, like, the loneliness epidemic, but also just the fact that people's mental health in general, maybe if they don't identify themselves as being lonely, it's like choosing to go out and do the thing or choosing to go out and do something that you are probably picking because it's something you're interested in is always going to make you feel better at the end of the day than sitting at home 9 times out of 10.
Yeah. Our brains were not wired to be online all the time. And I hate to say it, when you don't go on digital social media, it does feel good. You feel better. I hate to say it, but the rumors are true. Going outside works.
You heard it here first.
So I definitely see and understand a need for it. I mean, yeah, you're right. Anything that gets more people outside and offline is, I think, good for society. Have you ever met anyone with brain rot? I feel like there's a lot of like younger people who, when they talk about things, I'm like, this is only internet speak. Like, I've never heard these words or these thoughts in the real world before.
No, I've definitely like felt my fiance look at me like I had brain rot when I was talking about, like, especially like specific example, the whole Willy Wonka Glasgow AI thing. He, as someone who's like very offline, he literally was like, what on earth are you talking about? And I was just like, and now I'm putting the meme of that on the other meme of like, what do people put in this weird shelf thing that they have above their doors in suburban Midwestern homes? And he was literally like, you lost me 20 minutes ago. So I feel like maybe I need this app too more than I think I do. Maybe I need something to tell me to go outside.
Oh, I know I need the app. I realized a few weeks ago that I was too deep into, and I'm not even on TikTok, but I just realized that I understand too much of the references on Twitter. And that's when I realized, like, I gotta stop knowing this stuff.
I need to know less.
I need to know less. I'm tired of knowing. I put like a PSA to all my friends. I was like, no more knowing. I don't want to know anymore.
You just crave.
I crave outside, in-person events. Pie.
The other thing that I thought was super interesting for this conversation is, of course, most people probably are aware of like Andy Dunn's history with building different companies as well as the mental health issues that he struggled with sort of throughout. So it's really interesting hearing of like the differences between building this company versus last. And the phone jail thing, I was like, I wish I had the mental strength to just like lock my phone in another room like for an entire day. Like I wish I could do that.
I know. I have timers on all of my apps, and I just started sleeping away from my work phone, which also helps mentally. But I mean, what am I going to do at 1:00 in the morning when I wake up, though, if not like scroll the Daily Mail or Twitter? The jail box would have to be near me, I fear. I would need the key.
You're like, I'd have to still have it on me at all times, even if I couldn't open it.
Yeah, it has to be near me.
But yeah, I wish I was getting 8 hours of sleep a night. I like that. I love hearing someone committing to those things, especially in this space. Because I mean, it was like one of the Twitter discussions of the week, I think last week, with that company being like, when we hire you, you work 7 days a week and you work 60 hours. And like, that's just how we work. And like, you just have to be fine with that. And the guy said he got death threats, but job applications from it. And it's just like, there's too much hustle culture like in startups. So it's nice to hear someone come and be like, yep, I did that. It did not work out. So I'm trying something else this time. And I think other people should think about trying it too, because you know me, I've said this on the show before, I am anti-hustle culture. I am pro-lazy culture, pro-nap culture, pro-couch culture, well, I guess this is exactly the opposite of what Pi wants you to do.
I am pro inside. No, yeah, definitely. The remote work things I feel like this is going to be a debate for a long time, because even though it seems like a lot of companies are, or a lot of tech companies in particular, and even media companies are trying to get everyone back into the office, it's like, how can you make us go back after we got a taste of what not going into the office was like?
I know.
Like, how can you expect me to just not remember the days where I didn't have to come into an office? But I don't know, which one do you think is the future, though? Companies that are like more hybrid, or companies that are like 5 days a week?
I don't know. It's hard for me to decide because I know so many people, the hybrid structure works better, but then this totally ties into the kind of people using Pi. People really crave that 5-person a week thing. They crave those random interactions with people at the office and like, oh, everyone's grabbing lunch somewhere. Like, I want to come too. Like, people crave that kind of stuff. So I know I even had friends who like still don't have return to office mandates to go to work 5 days a week. That's not me, but like, this is also the same thing of like, I probably wouldn't sign up for something like Pi, but I get there's a lot of people who do want something like this.
Yes, we encourage other people to sign up for Pi. I am on my couch.
I'm going to go sit on the couch.
Go touch grass. Yes.
Found is hosted by myself, TechCrunch senior reporter Becca Skutak, alongside senior reporter Dominic Midori-Davis. Found is produced by Maggie Stamets with editing by Kel. Our illustrator is Bryce Durbin. Found's audience development and social media is managed by Morgan Little, Alyssa Stringer, and Natalie Kreisman. TechCrunch's audio products are managed by Henry Pickavet. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week.